takes a little while. Okay, it says we are recording, and I'm supposed to inform you of this fact, which I just did. So, hello and welcome to the show that has no name because this is not a Q&A video. I am Panyo Basa, and these are my honored guests, Numa and Stevens, who have been my honored guests on previous occasions. And this time, we are going to talk about a subject that is near and dear to everybody's heart, pretty much, with a few exceptions, and that is the situation of young Western women nowadays. And what inspired me to want to do a video about this is that we have a Discord server that is associated with mainly with my Q&As and so forth, and just Buddhism in general. And there's been a lot of discussion of the woman problem, or the WQ. And there's one fellow known well to all three of us who is so black-pilled on the subject that he has been sternly warned that if he discusses women one more time, he's going to be deleted from the Discord server. And what really inspired me to make a video about this subject was some posts made by Stevens here, actually, to the effect that it's so difficult for a young man to date a young woman in the West because most young women have become a kind of hollow NPC incapable of self-reflection. So that just, it was kind of a mind blower for me. I mean, I really don't have much experience with being intimate with young women. I mean, since I was a young man, you know, it's like I've never been intimate with a woman who was below the level of Gen X. You know, I've never been intimate with a millennial or a Gen Z or anything like that. So you two fellows, I assume, have much more than I have anyway. And so with regard to that, I think you may be doing most of the observations based on personal experience, whereas I'm more in a position to give like biological observations, you know, anthropological observations in the old-fashioned sense of anthropology, back before anthropology became just another kind of pseudoscientific Marxist studies field. So also, I would just like to make the disclaimer that none of us three guys are exactly normal. I think maybe Numa, being a Neoplatonist occultist, may be the most normal, normal of the three of us.
I don't know. Stevens, maybe he might be higher in the weirdo department. I don't know.
Yeah. Stevens, if you know his life story, yeah, he's definitely an outlier, and I'm somewhat of an outlier also. So it may be that you're at least 1 or 2 points closer to the like the main part of the bell-shaped curve, but who knows? It's hard to say. And so anyways, the topic of discussion is like the situation of young American women with possibly some like philosophical reflection on why they became this way, and you know what can be expected and what could like optimistically be done about the situation. And so I'll just hand the discussion over to either one of you who
yeah, sure. My video's going in and out, so I'll just talk until it comes back up again. I was just thinking it's kind of like, it's like a chicken or the egg problem. Which came first? You know, did men get bad or did women get bad? And so, you know, if you go on Twitter today, you know, the men are constantly blaming it on the women are constantly blaming it on the men. And so this is this big issue that everybody is constantly fighting over. And there's all of these sort of technical intricacies and statistics that everybody will cite. And, you know, I don't know, people blame it on men in the sense that they say, well, men became weak, you know, and they're no longer able to kind of give women the structure that they want, and they listened maybe too much to women. They gave women these freedoms that ultimately led to women's lives being lower quality, even though it's, you know, it's sort of ostensibly what women wanted, but now they're less happy than they've ever been. And everybody seems to be less happy than they've ever been. So there's kind of, I guess, this whole revival movement of people saying, well, men have to kind of get back to this archaic level of themselves, and that's kind of, you have the Bronze Age mindset kind of movement adjacent to like the red pill movement, and then the people saying, well, it's all men's fault, and men really just have to kind of like improve themselves, right? Sigma male grind set. That's what a guy I know here was saying. He said, no, I'll wait until I'm 35 and then I'll get a girlfriend. But by that time I'll be a millionaire and then they won't be able to reject me and so on. And a friend of mine said, if you're not doing anything now, what makes you think you're going to be doing anything when you're 35? It's a delusional situation that young men put themselves in, because you can still look around and see the occasional guy who is dating a woman is like maybe poor or just an abuser or whatever. And here all these guys think that if they spend the next 10 years taking steroids and getting plastic surgery and making millions of dollars, that they're going to score a woman. And it just doesn't seem that that's the case. And so the question then becomes, well, what is it exactly that these women are looking for? And of course, there's been so many theories batted around in the manosphere, if you want to call it that, right? There's the looks maxing group that says, well, we have to have perfect facial symmetry. That's what matters, is the perfect facial symmetry. And then there's of course the money group that says, no, we have to focus on getting money. There's the group that says, no, you have to learn game and do all of these contrived like techniques where you walk up to people and try to pick up women in these, very kind of usually artificial kind of cringy ways that when, you watch videos of this stuff, they call it pickup, and it just makes you cringe looking at it.
Yeah.
So these people are constantly arguing over, what is it? What do we do? How do we do this? And nobody can seem to figure out exactly what the problem is. That's the big question, right? Is what do women really want? Because we've seen reproduction, for example, just drop radically in terms of the numbers. I can't remember what they are off the top of my head, but it's just a massive decrease in not just reproduction, but also sexual activity. I think it was over half of men under 30 didn't have sex last year, and some massive proportion of them are virgins. And you've got, I think it's 60 to 70% of men are considered to be single technically, while you only have like 30% of women that are single. So then you get into the hypergamy thing where guys are saying, well, these women, they're dating a very small pool of men who, for whatever reason, are able to convince women, I guess, that they have a high sexual market value by either abusing them or kind of just using these kind of psychological techniques, or maybe they're on the dark triad, rather, psychopathy and narcissism and whatnot. And this rejection, this constant rejection aimed at the women, it activates basically schizoid or traumatic compartments in their mind created from childhood, from being raised in this society, that then indicates that these men are high value and that they can do better. And the theory is in hypergamy is that the woman will only date the best possible match that she can find because she's optimizing, but her indicators are skewed, are flawed. And there's been all kinds of theories on that, on why women will tolerate this kind of abuse or gravitate towards it. And one of them that's interesting is there's this idea now, it's related to why women are liberal more often, and it's that birth control destroys the amygdala in some way, so that the woman's fear centers are specifically targeted. So she's no longer able to get in touch with her sort of natural like defense mechanisms or alert mechanisms. And so as a result, she will put herself into situations where her normal survival instinct would activate. It's the same thing also with the focus on migrants, that women just universally, white women are so universally in support of bringing in these migrants that then are assaulting them. and they seem to have no compunction about that whatsoever. And so there is, this has caused a lot of contempt and raised a lot of ire in the Twitter battle of the sexes, I've noticed.
Yeah, so it's not entirely a situation with regard to what young Western women have become. I mean, young Western men have become something different from when I was a young Western man. But still, there does seem to be a significant shift in the psychology of just young people in general, I guess, which of course includes women, which is like the main topic of discussion, I suppose. So, how about you, Numa? What's your statement on the state of the problem?
I would start off by saying it seems like this ultra hypergamy thing that's come up in like black pill circles this seems like a lot of this is a Gen Z thing, and I don't have any. I'm a bit older, significantly older than that. I don't have any experience with Gen Z women. My party faves was back pretty much all the women I was involved with. Almost all of them were from the millennial generation. And I didn't experience any of the problems really that people are like younger people are talking about now. I mean, yeah, a lot of these women were like promiscuous and partied a lot. I mean, I was in the party scene, so I was kind of a wash in that. But like, they weren't like bitter, like man-hating harpies or anything. They were mostly like nice, nice women. I didn't really have the kind of problems that were being reported by a lot of these like more like Gen Z doomer types here. But I think what I experienced possibly was a bridge that led up to what's going on now. I think the situation now is largely a product of everybody being online and being glued to their electronic devices, and especially these dating apps like Tinder and Hinge and Bumble. I've never used any of these, by the way. I just find the whole concept to be just perverse beyond reason. But the way these apps, the algorithms, the way they are gamed is that only like the best looking men are going to get attention, just the way these things are set up. And so in the old days of dating, we're still talking post-sexual revolution here. Man or a woman's dating circle was limited to kind of the people you know, friends and friends of friends, or like people your family knew, that sort of thing. So there was a natural limit on what your dating pool was. With online dating, especially the apps, a woman could go on there and she's got the practically entire town's men. It's almost like a shopping catalog where you have the whole town's men on there. So like women are naturally selective about who they're getting with, and especially on an app where all you see are just pictures and really superficial stuff. They're only gonna pick like the top of the top of the top of the top. So then like all the other guys on here, they're getting nothing. They're like hardly getting any matches, if anything at all. And they just come out really, just with a terrible sort of just a self-defeating experience that's a total hit to their self-esteem. So I imagine that's in part driving a lot of that kind of sentiment. And plus, people these days just don't. There's a lot less organic in-person groups and meeting people and stuff like that. Everything's done online first. So, but there's a whole. I came up with a whole list of stuff of just different things that have led up to the situation we're in now. And I mean, it really starts with the sexual revolution, where once you get these technologies like cheap contraception and a decline in religiosity, you get all these things like feminism and then mass employment of women in the workplace, which means women making more money independent of their family or being married, means that's really less money to go around for men to earn. So that then you get this increase of disposability of men, and men without a purpose. This is one of the things I think that feminize them. There's a whole lot of factors that lead to these weak and kind of feminized men that women just biologically don't find to be very attractive on average. Yeah, so the whole hypergamy thing comes from these factors I listed before. and the dating app stuff, lack of face-to-face meetings. I think the big one is really the erosion of communities, religion, and the family. I think that's a huge factor leading to what we talked about, like just the overall psychological decline and even misery among a lot of young women and men too. Let's be honest here. Another big thing too is because of feminism and sort of the legal culture that's catered and pandered to it, society no longer shames female bad behavior and sometimes even rewards it. The court system sometimes does. Yeah, no. Ironically, slut shaming was mostly historically something women did to other women.
Yeah.
Women often were the self-police of a community. I mean, the slut shaming, that's part of the whole dynamic, I think, referred to as intrasexual competition among women knocking each other down a peg constantly to try to gain an advantage over, what they, at least is psychologically competition for attracting a higher value man. So yeah, but so they can basically behave as bad as they want in many situations and get away with it. Meanwhile, men's behavior is put under a microscope, and every tiny little infraction is called out, shamed, and even like harshly punished sometimes. And another big thing, this is sort of the end of my little list here, is this is a big thing with TikTok now, especially. Women are constantly giving each other terrible advice. And you want to say they're doing it intentionally. I think it's some of this is like subconscious behavior. This is another part of the intersexual competition where they're giving them bad advice. So A, they're going to make the same mistakes they do, so they feel like less of a failure. And B, it's knocking them down a peg to make them less of a competition for the top level men they're chasing due to the hypergamy. So there's my little, I guess, brief opening spiel.
Yeah, you got like 50% of men, I believe. I don't think we know the exact statistics because they haven't been released by the companies, but 50% of men on Hinge, for example, do not receive a like ever, do not receive a match ever. And so that's a pretty severe number, right? Yeah. And so pretty much it appears that regardless of what a woman looks like, she's going to be a wash in matches, because it ultimately reduces down to the Tinder situation where, for example, every man swipes just automatically on every woman. And then the women just basically go through, and it's assumed that every single man is going to swipe on every single woman, and they just pick, I assume, the most attractive men in the area. And it kind of creates this funneling effect. But furthermore, having been raised, I think, with the internet, like you were saying, Numa, is this technological problem. It's this problem where people no longer relate in a multidimensional fashion. They're relating in this way that is increasingly, they call it scopophilic. It's entirely based on the visual medium of perception, because we're seeing each other on these apps, but not communicating in any other way. We can't really hear each other. We can't demonstrate, our skill level or what we can do. Of course, we can put our income down. That's one important thing that men generally do, is they put their income level. And that is supposedly, one thing that women may actually care about, because if you could put down that you've got a couple $1 million, then you may at least attract somebody that wants to take your money. But beyond that, it creates this situation which is just very, very disenchanting. It deters communication between people, and I think it really, more than ever, is changing the nature of the male image, where the way that the man looks is considered to be more and more important. And it's really turned a lot of men very neurotic because they can't figure out what's wrong with them. It seems like on every normal level, these people should be attractive or well put together. I know a lot of men here at Columbia who are like coming from these Connecticut boarding schools, and they look like people from these Ralph Lauren catalogs. They're very, good looking, over 6 foot, great physical shape. very high IQ, tons of money, impeccably well dressed, you know, and yet they've never been on a date in their lives, and they have no prospects and no hope for that. And it's just very odd. And you get the sense that something is really amiss here, that nature in some way is broken or is not working right. And you just look down the street, and when you do see a couple, the matching is so weird. It's so off. You know, it's like you'll see this guy who, again, he looks like a model or something, and there will be a woman who is just sort of like obese or something. That clearly somehow the market values there are just not equivalent to one another. And so many women are just walking around. I guess they're almost all of them are not in relationships, or they're in, I guess this is the term, the evolution of this term, situationship now, right?
We used to just call that friends with benefits. That was the back in my day. That was the term.
Right. And so it's kind of like, well, yeah, I'm in this thing where it's like it's a thing of convenience for me, and I guess I can get something out of it from the guy, whether it's some brief sex or some money or something like that, and but that's it. And she can, I guess, just kind of continue through her life like that. And these women believe that they really don't need to ever interact with men on any level other than that. And there's something inside of women naturally, I suppose, related to their survival, where they just don't really need that. They don't feel, and this is another theory, is that women, the way that they feel love is very different from the way that a man feels love. The woman's love is much more centered around her survival prospects. And so if she has, for example, the government to fall back on at all times, if she has this safety net, which is always going to provide for her, it's always going to be there. If she gets pregnant, it's going to take care of her child, it's going to give her money. There's no threat or potential threat of any type of survival problem occurring for her. Well, then maybe she just doesn't need to associate with men ever. And there's been plenty of talk about that, discourse about that in the feminist sphere, the idea that men are now obsolete because this infrastructure has been built. Of course, they always ignore who it was built by, right, and who maintains it. So there is this myopia there, but that this infrastructure will always be here and it will always take care of us. And so we're now moving out of this era where there was this antiquated thing known as a man. And we can remove the male sexual dimorphism, and we can narrow the sexes into one, and we can remove sexuality entirely because it's a kind of a dirty, unpleasant thing in some ways that we don't want to talk about. And I think a lot of that comes from this unconscious Judeo-Christian conditioning that goes unacknowledged. But you even get that from these feminists that are supposedly sex positive, and yet they want to do away with sexuality in a lot of ways by narrowing the gap between the sexes, because I guess in some way it's like a metaphysical evidence of the inequality that's there in nature. And we don't want to believe that nature is sort of cruel or evil, and we want to believe that nature is just like our society. You know, it has all these cushions, it is friendly and it helps us and all this type of stuff like that. It's not going to let us down. There's no oppression in it. And they fail to see that, well, you know, no, society in and of itself is a byproduct of nature. And the way that these women are acting is a byproduct of nature. And so, you know, it's interesting to think about. I don't know where I was going with this, but
the nature part, I think, is interesting. Few people want to acknowledge the raw, like, evolutionary nature. It basically boils down to two statements: men are pigs and women are whores. This is just, we're talking about the lizard brain part, of course.
Right.
But we are humans. We have the rational faculty that can regulate and you know, sort of mitigate those kind of urges and channel them into you know, more productive endeavors.
Yeah, it's like modern innovations have short-circuited nature in a number of ways. I mean, we are a mammal, we're an animal, we have animal instincts, which for the human is usually defined as human nature. And a lot of our instincts have been short-circuited, like just the invention of processed sugar and so forth has sort of short-circuited our instinctive like for sweet food, because that back in the old days was like fruit and berries that were actually nutritious, and now we're eating donuts and so forth that isn't nutritious. Like our sexual instincts have been short-circuited by pornography, where we just get stimulated all by ourselves just by seeing a woman who isn't there. And now it's to some degree like the female attraction for men, which is largely based on just sort of an instinctive feminine insecurity and sort of timidity, lack of self-confidence to some degree. And so now, I mean, they, like Numa was saying, they can just rely on the government. They just marry the government and, vote for a socialistic welfare state. And so that has been largely responsible, not entirely responsible, but largely responsible for just the collapse of the nuclear family throughout Western civilization. But I am curious, like what really inspired me to want to do this video was Stevens talking about how difficult it is to find a girl that he can have any kind of stable relationship with. So I would like you to elaborate a little bit on just the trials and tribulations of trying to find the right girl.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you don't
Sure,
mind.
sure. Yeah, well, first I should say also that the women that do actually want to be in relationships, they're presented with this difficult situation, which, you have to be empathetic for, because the prices of everything are rising so rapidly, and you can no longer really live in this kind of single working parent household. It's almost like, everybody's got to be working at all times because you're increasingly treading water. As inflation gets worse and worse, the prices are rising, and this younger generation is growing up in this environment, and they're seeing that, oh, my work is not necessarily always rewarded. The American dream, we're promised a 2-car garage and a house and 2 kids and all that, and now, we used to be able to afford that with one parent working, a man working, and now you got to have both people working, and even then you still might not be able to afford a kid, supposedly, at least that's what people say. And they want to have their high standards of living and still be able to reproduce as well. So you have women who would jump into a relationship and would have children, but then they take a step back and they have a second thought and they say, well, but wait a second here. If I get into this relationship with this man and I have this child and then he abandons me, for example, what will I do? I won't be able to raise the child. I'll be out on the street. I need to have a safeguard. I need to have my own career. I need to make sure that I have my own stream of income coming in. But the problem with that is that by the time I get that done, I'll be this certain age. And then when I have this child, I will have to kind of quit my job, or I'll only be putting in part-time and it's not going to be good enough. And so they really want the best of both worlds. And they're worried about this, what they consider to be submitting to a man. In other words, trusting a man that he will support her, because they're going on the internet and seeing all of these disastrous scenarios where men are doing all of these terrible things to women and so on. And so they think, oh, well, I have to be careful and I can't get into this situation. I can't trust anybody. And so that is a huge deterrent for women, because again, they end up getting on this treadmill where they work more and more and they need to get ahead more and more. And by the time they're in their mid-30s and their fertility is beginning to wane, they look around and realize, oh no, my value is decreasing in the eyes of men. Or maybe they don't think of it that way, but they just start to realize something's different. I'm not getting the same amount of adulation and attention that I used to. Because you see, so many of these women, what they're doing is they're receiving this mass amount of adulation and harvesting this for attention and affirmation from dozens and dozens of men, so they can live out this fantasy of, or maybe not even men, maybe just anonymous internet accounts of dozens or even hundreds or thousands of internet accounts that they're living this perpetual courtship with, that gives them all of these narcissistic kind of highs and lows, and the abuse and everything all tied in one, that kind of arouse their central nervous system, I guess. And they will do that right up until infertility. And then they realize, oh, wait, I never had a child. But by the time that kind of drive starts to kick in, and they're in their mid-30s, they realize, well, who's going to take me now? Now I have to settle. But they're not going to do that. This generation is not capable of any kind of compromise at all because of this extremely high level of narcissism. The women are not willing to take someone of comparable sexual market value. And so at that point, then they say, there's no good men, all men are evil. And all of these negative things about men then begin to appear on the Twitter sphere of these women who got dumped by these abusive men that they were dating, or by or that they couldn't find somebody after they spent 15 years on being chased by these dozens or hundreds of anonymous internet accounts. And so that's kind of the problem here of women getting into relationships. You have half of them don't want that because they prefer to live in this hyper real imaginal sphere of childhood wish fulfillment. And that's really what it is, childhood wish fulfillment, because they never developed, the society never forced them to develop in any kind of significant way psychologically. It never challenged them. It never asked them to see anyone else's perspective. It never taught them that lots of people have to work minimum wage jobs and live normal lives. Not everyone is a millionaire influencer and so on and so forth. And not everyone can get with a millionaire influencer. There's, firemen and people digging ditches and whatever else, making this world run. So that's the one half, and they're completely narcissistic and deluded. And then the other half you have are good women, but they are concerned that the society just isn't set up to accommodate them having children anymore, and is set up to really just put pressure on the family unit everywhere, destroy the family unit, erode the family unit, prevent these bonds from forming. And that's a thing that destroys a lot of would-be relationships before they even get off the ground. And then the relationships that do happen, therefore, are extremely casual. They are extremely shallow in the sense that they are intentionally designed to prevent any kind of emotional attachment from forming there, to increase the ease of breaking off the relationship very quickly, like basically a one-night stand or a situationship or whatever you call it, where the man is basically just kind of a tool that can then be tossed aside for the next one, the next time that it strikes the woman's fancy. Basically, I mean, that's my take on it, and that's one reason why I've had so much trouble, is because most women seem to fall into one of those 2 or 3 camps.
Yeah, I do think that like second wave feminism, one of the main purposes of that, first wave feminism was just giving women the right to vote mainly. Second wave feminism was essentially giving women the right to be as sexually promiscuous as men. That seems to have been one of their main, it was like one of their main motivations. They didn't want men to become more sexually moral like women were required to be. Instead, they just wanted to like imitate men in that respect. And I do think, as a person who has a degree in biology, I do think that there are not only physical differences between men and women, but also psychological differences between men and women. And like this female sexual promiscuity has not been the status quo for most of the existence of the human race. Women have been pretty well, required by society and cultural conditioning to be more virtuous than men. And so when all of a sudden they're just being able to have, a body count well up into double digits by the time they're 20 years old, then I mean they don't have as robust of a conscience as men do, because they're just like, their ancestors have not been exposed to this sort of thing. They just have it's a conscience that can mess up their mind more. And so it just kind of messes them up to some degree. Um, they have more complications, emotional complications with this kind of lifestyle, I think, than men who have been like this, since there have been men. But also women, they're more conformist than men are. And so when the culture is moving more towards greater promiscuity and less commitment and less stability in like pair bonds and so forth, then I mean they're going with it, and it's just sort of tearing up society to some degree. I don't know how well I expressed that, but I have been considering this for a long time. That I mean, that's part of it. Women, I think it's instinctive in women to be more conformist than men, largely because throughout most of the human race, you've got intertribal warfare, or in later times it'd be a larger scale than intertribal warfare, where the men are just killed off and the women are just enslaved or become concubines, and all of a sudden they're landed in a completely different culture where they have to worship different gods and follow different taboos and so forth. And so women are more flexible with regard to that sort of thing. That's why they're more sensitive to like fashion trends and so forth. Men, the clothing industry has tried for decades to try to get men as keen on fashion trends as women are, and it has not worked very well.
Yeah,
So,
the historical trope is, village or area gets raided and the women end up just sleeping with the invaders. Also, another thing just consistent throughout history is women have generally had very little choice over their partners or mates. Usually it's the society in one way or another chooses their husband for them, whether it's their father, community elder, religious institution, or something like that. It can go all the way from hard, like arranged marriages, say like in India, to a more casual system, even like in 19th century America, where you have the father or some other like church or community elders sort of vetting suitors for the daughter. It's just a very rare occurrence that, and at least in any kind of patriarchal society, that women just get to freely pick their own partners. And we're actually seeing now, this has been a social experiment for the last 50, 60, 70 years of what happens when you give women complete just freedom to pick whoever they want, and which is now being hyper accelerated by these dating apps. So the logical conclusion of that is Miss Average thinks Mr. 1 in 30 is on her level. That's her, that's the kind of man she deserves or, will only go for. So just do the math on that, and you can see what kind of clusterfuck of a situation that produces in mass, when you have a critical mass of women who bought into that mentality.
Yeah, that's another instinct in the human female, is hypergamy, which has been brought up a number of times. It's not just culturally conditioned. It can be reinforced by cultural conditioning, but it is natural. And there's many species of animals that are just obviously blatantly hypergamous, where the female naturally wants the best man she can, and biologically, so to mate with her and produce superior children.
Right. So
some species, I mean, rape.
I think what's evolved in our species is, I think it's a lot of Ice Age programming. So lizard brain woman, she wants the man who can fend off the saber-toothed tiger. So obviously, what kind of man that's going to be? Somebody big and strong and bold and not afraid to
contribute good genes to her children.
Yeah, well, good warrior genes at least. The problem is, in a civilization, you have to introduce a lot of artificial things to keep the civilization going. So if you want a civilization, you need the scribes, the blacksmiths, the priests, all kinds of other sort of men to be able to procreate too. Or else If you don't have that, you're just going to go back to some group of like hunter-gatherer brutes or some other kind of more primitive social structure. So you have to invent these social technologies so all the other like occupational specialists of men, they pass down their genes too. I think this is one of the sources of monogamous marriage, why that became such a thing, at least in civilized societies.
Yeah, I have read that one of the things that made Western civilization as strong as it was the standardization of monogamy, which then caused, instead of like these bachelor herds of men that, I mean, they join the army or something maybe, or else they just live with their parents and support their parents or whatever, that you had more essentially alpha males who had a family to fight for and a certain amount of dignity and a feeling of self-worth, that sort of system produces more strong men because it gives them more incentive to be strong. But it's like, I think it was Stefan Molyneux, who was a big deal, 6 or 8 years ago before he got universally canceled from mass like social platforms, that he was saying that like the internet dating phenomenon has just led us back into the age of harems, where a few men get the most women and like half the men don't get any. So
Yeah.
in a way,
Yeah,
it's like
I would say it's even more than half now. It's more like it's
More
that,
like the Pareto principle now, the 80-20, the
yeah.
80-20.
So feminism, ironically, has produced a return to harems, essentially.
Well, I guess it leads into in some of these manosphere circles the idea that women don't really don't know what the fuck they want.
Well, even
So
if they get what they want at an intellectual level, they wouldn't be happy. That's the problem. It's like feminism has allowed them to, chase their dreams and have their career and their children and everything else that they supposedly want, but it just doesn't work that way in reality. I mean, there have to be trade-offs. I mean, if you're going to have a full-time career, then it's very difficult to be a mother of 3 children unless you can just afford to just farm them out and have somebody else take care of them.
Well, you can. So I think there were ancient. I don't even want to call them matriarchal, but maybe matrifocal societies where that sort of worked. But what you need in a situation like that is you have like a huge house full of lots of kids that the women have, and then you have like a dictator grandmother who rules with an iron fist. But that's something completely alien to our own cultural and civilizational experience that wouldn't even be like practical. But I know there are a few like surviving examples of that sort of society.
Like what, for example?
There's one in, I think it's in China. It's like in this really rural mountainous region. I forget the name of the culture. It's one of those China has many ethnic minorities that people have never heard of. But I think it's something that actually emerged during the Middle Ages, not even from ancient time, where the men would go off on these long trade missions that would take many months. So it was mostly the women left alone. So they evolved this social structure where the girls would just sleep with whatever men they want, and then like paternity ended up not meaning anything. But the problem is you get this very backward, just very base agrarian society where the men have no incentive to do anything other than the bare minimum, like making sure the roof isn't falling off the house, or just doing just like basic manual labor to keep things up. But like men are not going to want to go above and beyond and do anything else unless they have actually paternity rights over their own kids and control over their property and stuff like that.
Yeah, I do think that women are often, I mean, many women are intimidated by just raw masculinity, like toxic masculinity. And so one of the projects of like a feminist society is to some degree emasculate men, which just makes the problem worse.
Yeah.
But look at public school, right? I mean, this is part and parcel of the society that we live in. So this circles back to pointing at men and trying to answer the question, what happened to men to cause this problem or to allow the problem? And I mean, you look at public school, right? You, from a very, very early age, are putting a large group of boys with this, usually old, embittered, woman who hates children and whose society has commissioned to basically break these children mentally, or to emasculate these young boys, to punish these young boys repeatedly, to teach them to be conformist and to stay still in a desk for 8 hours, and to think in a particular way, and to regurgitate information, and to basically just convince all of these people, these young men, that they require society's approval just to live, just to be themselves, and or that, I guess you'd say, that they in some ways can't be themselves and live a normal life. They have to exist in a way which is going to please this really sort of matriarchal or feminine power structure, this panopticon, right? And then you develop this internet surveillance society on top of that, that you now layer on top of this matriarchal education system. And now you have a system in which men are surveilled 24 hours a day and are going to be afraid to say things like we're talking about now, because they have something to lose. You know, if they're getting attention from women, then women en masse will punish them. It's like a policing system, basically, where anybody who shows these, you know, normative masculine traits is going to be punished by being removed from this system, you know, unless, I guess, the person is good enough looking or whatever, or reminds that triggers the primordial sexual instinct, and then the person can say anything, I guess. But if a normal man does that, a normal man tries to have a normative expression of masculinity, then he's going to get attacked and punished through these neologisms like the idea of toxic masculinity or being canceled or whatever. And that's going to destroy a man's livelihood. And so we all are living in fear and walking on eggshells of being attacked by this, you know, this matriarchy, which is watching us at all times. It's like the Anita Sarkeesian or whatever, the Gamergate and all this type of stuff, where, well, we can't have any male spaces. All male spaces have to be patrolled by a supervisor, a feminist supervisory presence at all times. And then that will lead into some type of social credits or some type of rating for each person that will feed back into this system, you know.
The dreaded HR department.
Yeah, the internet slang term for this whole mess is called the longhouse. Basically, the gynocratic panopticon you're speaking of here.
Although ironically,
exactly.
now
we
it's like
call that here too, the longhouse thing. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was just saying, ironically now, just due to mutations in the ideology that's very prone to mutation, that now you've got essentially there is no difference between men and women, and just whether you're male or female depends on just how you identify, how you feel, which is more of a feminine approach. It's like men tend to be, on average, you know, statistically more objective and empirical. Women tend to be more subjective. You know, they identify more with their feelings. Men identify more with their thoughts, that sort of thing, which is just completely, it's just heresy. It's blasphemy from just the modern Western or postmodern leftist point of view. But so now they're saying there's no difference between men and women. And so you've got men saying, you got women with penises now who are like dominating in athletics, for example. So it's just, the whole thing is just, it's, the mutations have gotten out of hand so that the whole system is becoming self-destructive. And whether that's by design or not, I don't know.
Well, I think it's so what we have this globalist managerial regime that essentially uses female tactics to enforce its will on everybody. So you can't, the great advantage to using these like feels over reals tactics is with, you know, male logical criticism, you could just use logic to point out immediately how absurd something is. But if you shout people down with emotional appeals and this, you can't even get to the part where the longhouse's ideas are even up for criticism or debate. I mean, we saw the beginning of this, remember back like in like the Gamergate era with the So some vaguely right of center speaker would show up on a college campus, and all the leftism, of course, always uses these female tactics. Leftists just screaming and shouting down, so the speaker can't even get on the stage to make like even their first point.
Yeah.
The postmodern cultural zeitgeist, I think, naturally is empowered by the out of balance femininity. I call it like chthon out of balance, from the word chthonic, right? Or kind of like the earth mother versus the sky father. It's this imbalance which then it lends the society to moving into a total kind of relativism and undermining any kind of foundational ideas. And that, I think, just comes from the natural predilection of women as being peacemakers, maybe, you know, anthropologically in a society, in a tribal situation, where the woman presumably would have been trying to, you know, negotiate grievances, or, as you said, maybe there's an invading tribe and the woman can't be in a situation mentally where she is looking at the old system as better than the new system. It's more effective if she's able to just see everything as relative and as basically, you know, roughly the same. And whoever dominates through power dynamics ends up being the one that dictates the so-called truth. And actually, you know, that is what postmodernism ultimately says, and that is what feminist ethics says, that there is no such thing as morality. It is actually, in fact, basically just whoever dominates through power is the one that dictates this oppressive notion of truth, and that the only ethics is a woman's care for her child. Basically, they call it feminist care ethics. This is an attack on the very foundational notions that there is such a thing as right and wrong, and even beyond that, it's an attack on identity itself, on the metaphysical notion of identities, and it's the epistemic notion that we can know what a thing even is in the first place. And so then that in turn lends itself to transgenderism, transhumanism, and of transnationalism, you know, the blending of nations together. Now well, why do we have to have the United States? Who drew those borders there in the first place? We can deconstruct that, why they drew those borders there, what they were motivated by, and then at the core we can see, oh, you know, well, all their beliefs were false anyway, so we could draw the borders anywhere. They don't really exist, and there's no such thing as race, and there's no such thing as culture or whatever, but at the same time, everything is culturally created, so we can have everybody from Mexico come to the U.S., and that's totally fine.
Yeah, and there's no such thing as race, but nevertheless, racism is taboo and is used as a kind of slur for just shutting somebody down.
Right,
Yeah.
You can't study it.
Well, all their assertions, it's all in bad faith anyway. They're just using it as a cudgel against their enemies. They don't actually, when they say there's no morality, they don't really believe that. They're just saying that to deconstruct their enemy's morality. It's like,
I do think the left has removed sensuality, sensual overindulgence from morality. I mean, that's one of the main changes, I think, in morality in modern times is like sensual excess, you know, like drug abuse or like sexual promiscuity and so forth is now just off the chart with regard to morality. It's just no longer a moral issue. It's all good.
mm-hmm.
Which has helped to just destabilize Western civilization, and it's obviously going to have to change because the situation is just self-destructive right now. It's sort of in a death spiral. It's almost a suicidal ideology.
Yeah, it really is, especially as of
moving
late.
into transhumanism and into basically an entire world with no boundaries, where we all are basically one superclass after the economy collapses, and it will, the world economy, not just the United States economy, because we're floating on this, what is it, $3 quadrillion derivatives bubble, which is basically just investing in nothing. That's what a derivative is. It's air. And ultimately, once that happens, and you dissolve all of these borders, and because people can't feed themselves, they will demand a solution, and that will be then introduced as this transhuman type of thing, and it'll be the 15-minute cities, where you'll never go more than 15 minutes from the area where you're born in, and the population will naturally dramatically decrease. There will be a mass die-off because the people aren't needed anymore. The logistical system is built. And once you get people into the situation where they are living in this basically like prison area run by artificial intelligence, the sexual dimorphism will grow closer and closer together. It will be decreased more and more to the point that there will effectively almost be like an asexual human being, much like was described in Brave New World. And I think Aldous Huxley perfectly presaged what was going to occur in that sense, where basically people get their sexuality from a screen or from this hedonistic zapping by touching this a knob, and then it zaps them, or they take drugs constantly, and they live in this meaningless society based on getting pleasure from, or trying to find meaning in pleasure from, these hedonistic activities that really ultimately don't lead anywhere. They don't lead into anything meaningful at all. And that's pretty much, that's what I would view as a dead end for humanity. And I think, there's alternate courses to that if the decentralization stuff were to take over and were to prevent, or to basically make the formation of a centralized world government impossible, just by virtue of the fact that decentralized operations and logistics are so much more hyper efficient. If we can get to that stage first, before the world is locked down, then we'll be able to escape that fate. But yeah, I think if we don't, and we're moving into a situation where the relations between men and women will really cease to exist at all, basically.
Yeah, I do think that Brave New World was much more prophetic with regard to Western civilization than Orwell's 1984. Although he did get a few things wrong, it's still mostly men that are running the thing in the Brave New World, which is now kind of obsolete. But yeah, it'd be like ideological porn for a lot of leftists to read Brave New World. I mean, it was meant as a dystopia, but I think that's they would love it. Really?
Yeah, I think it's due for a reboot, like a rewrite, only with like more like wokish, not promoting woke, but pointing out the the sort of woke things that happen as part of it, like having some big fat ugly woman is the leader of the Brave New World instead of the confident male figure who's in the book.
Yeah, I do think that it was really insightful of him to recognize that one of the main ways that the government keeps everyone under control, besides just handing out free drugs, is this idea that the people are programmed not to develop any kind of strong bonds with anybody or anything, that you have any kind of desire, you're supposed to gratify it immediately so that it doesn't build up into something powerful enough to form a threat to the government, essentially. And that's pretty much what's going on now, like with just sexual promiscuity and so forth. It's people don't really have anything firmly to believe in anymore, other than just what they're told to believe by the ruling elite and their propagandists, essentially.
And the sexuality is not a means of connecting people. It's just still another isolated hedonistic event, like any other hedonistic event, playing a video game, taking a pill, whatever, which is just meant to do nothing except elicit a rote chemical response in the brain. And that's what this engagement in sexuality is for the majority of women. I think that they are basically, people accuse men of being, masturbators and this type of thing, addicted to porn, but so many of these women are the same way. They themselves addicted to pornography now, or they're addicted to, if it's not directly, pornography, then it is erotica or similar types of things that they're getting a thrill from, and they're addicted to this just as well. They have dopamine problems or whatever kinds of depression issues physiologically within the brain that then require these repetitive activities, but the activities don't connect them. They're not interpersonal, between a man and a woman. It is really just basically, using a man as a disembodied object.
Yeah.
And you see that in pornography too. The man really is reduced to a phallus or just sort of a disembodied person. That the camera doesn't even look at the man. Man is basically just an instrument or a phallus. And you see that Foucault kind of presages that this is all part of his kind of like idea of replacing meaning with pleasure, or replacing logic and reason and ethics and stuff like that with pleasure. That pleasure can be this new first principle, and we can decenter the sexes to where a man could actually be the passive partner, and then and the woman just basically uses this disembodied phallus for herself. And then then you have the advent of sex toys and all this type of stuff, and now you have the what is it, like the virtual reality pornography. All of this stuff takes connection away or makes it a non-issue with regards to sexuality. So I think that's another major problem.
Meanwhile, this phenomenon that we've been discussing is much more prevalent in more leftwards leaning or Democrat or liberal parts of the country than here, like in South Carolina, the so-called Bible Belt, where I went to the grocery store just the other day, and I was mildly amazed by the number of white women walking through the grocery store with like 4 or 5 little kids following along. That it's still more traditional here, that you can still see plenty of happily married couples, walking hand in hand down the sidewalk or whatever. It seems to be much less of an issue, except maybe in like the larger cities and the university areas and so forth. But in just mainstream normie traditionalist South Carolina, it's still much closer to the way things used to be than the way things are becoming. So there's still some hope for traditionalism. Plus, it's also been pointed out that this new system just doesn't reproduce, whereas the traditionalists are much more fertile and fecund than
Yeah.
than
The
than the
people,
new leftists are.
the
So
yeah, the
in
people pushing most.
generations, unless they're continually recruiting like the Shakers had to do, then it's just going to die out.
Well, they recruit through the school system. They don't. The saying is the left doesn't have kids; they have yours.
Yeah.
But I agree overall. Most of the people pushing these bad ideas aren't really reproducing at all. I think there will be the new counterculture will be a resistance to technology, at least to some degree. Maybe not full Ludditism, but just a sort of a minimalization, a reduction in the use of technology. And I hopefully, maybe this is just wishful thinking on my part, a lot of the technological excess will become uncool when this supposed counterculture might arise. And then we might see a return to more decentralized forms of living. If there's an economic downturn or collapse, that might actually be kind of a kick in that direction anyway.
Plus, there's just the inevitable cycle of history. I mean, it's just inevitable that bad times will make strong men.
Yeah.
Things get bad enough, then things are going to get better afterwards, just because it's like a crucible of fire that's going to strengthen all the soy boys, or at least the few male children that are being brought up into the dark new era that is being created.
Yeah, there will be a backlash. I mean, the hard times it'll create. I think I've heard the term a patriarchal reboot of some sort, and then we'll sort of have a reset where things, go back to normal again for a while. Who knows how long, and then things get soft again, and the same shit again.
Yeah.
The decentralization will introduce this meta-modern decentralized neighborhoods where people will begin to move out of the cities because the prices are just simply too high. Here in Manhattan, the average rent now is $5,000. It's over that now, I think. It's $5,000 a month, and it's really become unsustainable. It's terminal, and people don't want to live in a city where it's kind of like San Francisco. It's littered with the mentally ill. Every time you go out, you're going to be asked by 5 people for money, and you could be assaulted, and all of this stuff is happening now, and it's getting worse day by day by day. So the decentralization, it's going to have the opposite effect to the Industrial Revolution, where we had people move into the city and centralize because it was more efficient. The means of production was in this one place, and it was industrial, and you needed large amounts of workers to work that, and to work the means of production to create these tremendous amounts of products for people. And now people are moving into this kind of data-driven environment rather than a product-based, industrial production-based environment. So they can work in other places now because of the decentralization push. So they're moving out, and you'll get this donut hole effect in the cities. People will begin to move back into more remote areas along with other people who do and perform the same types of jobs that they themselves do, and they will live in these kind of little clusters, I guess you would say, almost like an anarcho-capitalistic commune, where they will be able to sell their services and their functions, whatever they do online with the AI and whatnot. They will do that remotely together in these groups where you will be able to live basically, with your friends. And I think it's at that point that you will see a reboot of some of these earlier values, like a kind of a new tribalism. There will be groups that emerge that are kind of like cults, or that are basically just parallel societies. They don't need as much interaction with the government. The decentralization really reduces, for example, the need to pay one's taxes or the need to interact with the government in general. And it will naturally lead to, I think, just the zeitgeist, the Aquarian zeitgeist, and the changing of the age will naturally obliterate the majority of centralized institutions, if not eventually all centralized institutions everywhere, regardless. So you'll have that, and then you'll also have this kind of neo-feudalism where people are living increasingly around corporations, around these strongholds. There will be people, for example, growing food for Amazon. Amazon will have its own farmers that will be harvesting food to feed the workers of Amazon, because Amazon will be more powerful and important than the United States government, because the U.S. Postal Service can't deliver in the same way that Amazon can deliver. Amazon can deliver anything, anywhere. Logistically, it's erased, the borders. And it doesn't matter whether we're in New York City or in the middle of Podunk. They can just have a drone come and drop this thing, like 5 hours after we order it. So that's not a problem anymore. So I think that's one thing that's going to lead back into this traditionalist resurgence. And so the powers that be, of course, dread that. What they want to do is to keep people in, create this locked in smart city, basically, is what they're calling it, in accordance with the prescriptions of the WEF, to lock everybody into this thing and have them surveilled by the system so that they can continue atomizing any bonds that people will create. But there will be a networked state. Now, there will be people, individuals creating their own worlds, and it'll be in that gap that myth and all of these sort of more ancient ideas will come back again. There will be a magical revival, and this kind of techno-paganism will begin to spring forth in the gaps between the sort of like globalist totalitarianism, I think. So there is some hope, and there will be a revival of normative relationships between men and women. Probably Numa and I will never get to see it, or will be like too old to really enjoy it. But I think, you know, it will definitely happen, at least for the generation being born now. They'll live to see that world.
Yeah, I think the fact remains still that more than half of the population are going to remain sheeple or NPCs, or people just incapable of original thoughts and so forth. They're just going to follow along with whatever happens to be the status quo. And so, I mean, how things are going to change without some radical, just upheaval, just some massive overthrow of the system. I
Well,
really don't know. I don't think it's going to just happen gradually and organically, that there's going to have to be some sort of cataclysmic change, I think, in order for things to get back on track ultimately.
well, if we can reboot actual feudalism, not like fake corporate techno feudalism, then all those NPC sheep will have a use once again, like a better use, I'd say. But that's just that's a weird that's a weird tangent right there. Yeah, I mean, I agree, Stevens, largely with what you said in the long future of a return to a more decentralized structure. I don't think it'll be an extension of the current power structures, like current corporations and managerial regimes. I like to go by the, I can't remember who told this joke, but once upon a time, there was a Roman bureaucrat who thought he was like the best thing in the world until there was a Visigoth dagger blade across his neck. So however that might I think that same principle will manifest at some point as far as our current overlords are concerned. But yeah, I think there will be more of a, I don't know, like a tribal, hopefully a resurgence of paganism. I would be all about that. I think that's kind of one of the keys maybe to return to tribes and stuff like that. But yeah, probably maybe long after we're dead. I don't know. I think the current system will find a way to chug along for at least a few more decades.
Yeah, you're already seeing a magical resurgence, revival of esotericism and occult studies online, and it's become extremely popular. They have, on TikTok, they have, it's called Witch Talk, which is, these young women from the, what is it, Gen Z or millennial, just the young under 20 crowd, dressing up and sharing little spells and whatnot on TikTok. This type of thing is very popular again. So I think that's just a sign and symptom of the next 2 millennia to come. We're just in this transitional period. It's just a question of, how do we get past the period? Will we be enslaved for, a good percentage of the next two millennia, or will we get through this pretty quickly? So I'm kind of leaning into accelerationism, sadly, but that's another matter entirely.
Yeah, so we've moved from the plight of modern Western woman to pretty much civilizational collapse and renewal. That may be like the only real cure of the problem, as much as it can be cured.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of why I've started leaning in. Like I said, the more that I see it, especially living in New York City, to the accelerationism, because I don't see any type of activism from the right as being even remotely in any way efficient, and I don't think that it's going to be.
Yeah, well, the Amish are increasing anyway.
Yeah, I'd like to have how about a pagan version of the Amish? I think that would be pretty cool.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool. I don't think it could be anything very Buddhist, because it couldn't really be non-violent or pacifistic if it had to face persecution.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't. If I was like a tribal chieftain, I would probably not include the turn the other cheek sort of ethic.
Well, if as we seem to have been surprisingly exhausted our our material to express ourselves, so to speak. I was a little bit worried that we were just going to be just wandering for hours in this wide expanse of potential discussion, but it does seem that we're slowing down. So I mean, if there's anything anyone wants to say before we end this with regard to the situation of young Western women in the West, young
Well,
white
I
women
was going
especially.
to say, I mean, I think, yeah, we could probably wander on the topic into other things for forever if you wanted to, but it's best to probably just keep it focused. And I suppose the best thing that I could say is, I think we still have to try to, no matter what, kind of keep a winner's mindset and not let it just destroy us. Because I mean, there's so many people that are just absolutely mentally being destroyed by this right now. It started with the pandemic, and it's just continuing along, and it's not going to stop. It's going to get worse and worse. And so people that are, hoping that the situation is going to magically fix itself, I wouldn't get my hopes up. But at the same time, we have to try and do the best that we can to deal with it however we see fit. And I just try to look at things as a challenge as best as I can, and recognize that, well, even if I did have everything that I wanted, then life would be pretty boring. So it's just a question of figuring out how to go about doing these things. And it is possible to do these things. There are still women out there who want whatever it is that you want. And it's just that it's become, more and more difficult, maybe almost even in some cases the point of impossibility to find it, but it is still out there. So I think we have to, like I said, try to keep the mindset that ultimately we will be victorious, but we just have a long way to go.
Yeah, I do agree that being blackpilled is not a winning strategy. That the only surefire way of failing is just to give up. And it reminds me of a saying of Winston Churchill. It's like the secret to success is to move from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. It's just, you just don't give up. It reminds me of
Yeah.
my father and his trials and tribulations with women. He was married 5 times, and he just could not, and just didn't even want to overcome his love of women in general, like his desire for a woman. And finally, number 5 worked, and he lived happily ever after with her. But one of the main, I guess, one of the great consolations to me with regard to interacting with women, I mean, men and women, we're like designed by evolution or nature to be together, even though there's differences that cause quite a lot of exasperation sometimes. But one of the great consolations for me is a certain YouTube video that maybe I should include in a link under this video, called The Hot Crazy Matrix. And it's like the thing starts with pointing out that on a scale of 1 to 10, all women are at least a 4 crazy. I mean, that's just something that you just accept. From a man's point of view, anyway. I'm sure women will have a different outlook on the whole situation. But if you just accept right from the get-go that any woman's going to be at least a 4 with regard to just being unstable or whatever, that you just accept that as something that when you're going into it, that you've already got that, just to remind yourself that, I mean, it's not necessarily going to be easy. But nevertheless, if you do find the right girl, and I mean, the right girl is out there somewhere for virtually every guy. That I mean, she might be quite the outlier, but still they're out there. She might not be towards the middle of the bell-shaped curve, but I mean, the right girl is out there somewhere. So just do the best you can and don't give up, and eventually, God willing, inshallah, you'll meet the right girl. And live happily ever after, of course, with a great deal of exasperation sometimes.
Yeah, look at it like a quest, right? And that's a more manly approach anyway, a more normatively masculine approach. If you want to have a masculine resurgence, then you shouldn't give up, and we should just insist on getting our way, and rather than withdrawing from the the pool of people out there and giving up or going into the red pill stuff or the black pill stuff. I think we should just insist on getting what we want, right? Which is in most people's cases is kind of, normal, traditional woman, reasonable. I would say, it doesn't have to be like, these women are concerned that the men are trying to insist that I submit or that I have no job at all and that I, stay chained to the oven all day or something like that. It's like, no, no, that's ridiculous. That's not what people are looking for. We just want something reasonable. I think most young men are looking for something reasonable, normatively speaking. And if we go out and just continue looking for that and continue insisting on it, then at least, maybe we'll have some sort of effect on the society. And that's the best that we can do and hope for. But giving up is not a manly virtue. So we should avoid that. And we should try to avoid the pessimism of consistently being down on ourselves, consistently thinking about it and framing it in a negative mindset, which I myself, can do. I fall into that as well, but I try to catch myself and try to stay as optimistic as I can to continue, pursuing the quest and continuing down the road.
Pursuing the Holy Grail.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and I mean, it gives you purpose and meaning in life, not just in terms of with women, but with anything. There's always should be something next, elusive down the road, which stokes your desire and your craving. Otherwise, you dry up, you get viragya, and you sort of leave the world. You become a spirit. And in my case, it's like
renunciant.
Right, exactly. As I get older and older, this sort of I feel that pull to leave the world occurring more and more, and I have to continually stoke my desire by, keeping myself on track, keeping myself in the world by finding new ways of stoking that. Otherwise, I kind of will start to drift off. But that's a sort of Nietzschean thing, right? That's why I kind of moved into paganism from Buddhism a little bit more.
How about you, Numa? Any final words to our viewing audience to inspire and uplift them?
I'm sure anything I'll say that's positive and uplifting, the Zoomer black pillar types will just call it cope.
Yeah, especially one in particular.
You guys were used to hearing from that particular. I don't want to bag on him. I actually have a soft spot for this dude, but
yeah,
that is a frequent response you might hear from him when trying to say something positive on this topic.
Okay, then I guess we are done, and I'll try to include links to you guys' internet presence below the video. Although on YouTube, I think I'm still forbidden from YouTube to post links because I answered a taboo question on one of my Q&A videos some months ago, and I'm still they're still smiting me because of it. But under Bitchute and Rumble, I'll be sure to include your links if you provide me with any, if I don't find them somewhere already. And with regard to you, the viewing audience, I would just say be happy.